The office tower looked almost empty that night. Most lights were off, and the city outside the wide glass windows had slowed to a quiet glow. Only one floor still showed signs of life. Inside the corner office, the CEO sat alone at his desk. His suit jacket hung on the chair, his tie loosened. Long days like this were normal for him. Meetings, numbers, calls, decisions that affected thousands of people. Yet when night came, the building felt cold and silent, like it did not belong to him anymore. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. His head hurt from staring at screens all day. The truth was, he did not trust people easily. Over the years, he had learned that titles and smiles often hid selfish intentions. He had caught employees stealing, lying, and cutting corners more times than he could count. That was why he liked staying late. Late nights showed him who people really were. A soft sound came from the hallway. The low hum of a cleaning machine, slow footsteps, the clink of a cart. The janitor had arrived. The CEO opened his eyes slightly and glanced toward the door. He had seen this man many times before, but never really noticed him. Middle-aged, slightly bent shoulders. Always quiet. Always working alone. Tonight, something about the man caught his attention. Maybe it was the way he moved, careful and calm, like he did not want to disturb anything. An idea crossed the CEO's mind. It was not planned. It came from habit, from years of testing people without them knowing. He leaned back again, let his head fall to the side, and closed his eyes fully. From the outside, it would look like he had fallen asleep at his desk. The door opened slowly. The janitor paused in the doorway. He held his breath for a second, looking toward the desk. He saw the man in the chair, eyes closed, body still. The office was expensive, clean, and powerful. The kind of room he only entered at night, but he did not step in right away. Instead, he whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I'll be quick." He rolled his cart inside and closed the door gently behind him. The CEO stayed still. He could hear everything. The soft sound of the cartwheels. The light tap of a trash bag being changed. The careful movement of someone who knew he did not belong in this space, but respected it anyway. The janitor did not rush. He wiped the desk slowly, lifting papers one by one, placing them back exactly where they were. When he reached a small object near the computer, a pen that looked expensive, he stopped. For a moment, his hand hovered over it. The CEO felt his chest tighten. This was the moment he always watched for. But the man only adjusted the pen so it lay straight and continued cleaning. The janitor moved around the room, cleaning the shelves, the windows, the floor. His breathing was steady but tired. The kind of tired that came from long days and short nights. Every now and then he paused, pressing a hand against his lower back, then continued without complaint. The CEO frowned slightly, though his eyes stayed closed. This was not what he expected. Most people changed when they thought no one was watching. This man seemed the same. The janitor finished most of the room and stood near the desk again. He looked at the sleeping figure, unsure what to do. The trash can beside the desk was almost empty. He could leave it, but that was not how he worked. He quietly pulled the bag out, replaced it, and tied the old one carefully so it would not spill as he turned away. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He froze. Panic crossed his face. He quickly pulled it out and silenced it, then glanced at the desk again. The CEO did not move. The janitor let out a slow breath. He leaned slightly against the desk, careful not to touch anything important. His shoulders dropped, just a little, as if the weight of the day finally found him. He looked older in that moment. Not weak, just worn. He spoke again, very softly. Not to the CEO, not to the room. To himself, "Just a few more hours," he whispered. "Then I'll come home." The words hit the CEO harder than he expected. They were simple, but they carried something heavy. The janitor rubbed his face with his hands and stared at the floor. "I promised," he murmured. "No matter what." He straightened quickly, as if ashamed of being caught talking. He picked up his cart and moved toward the door, then stopped. He turned back one last time and looked at the CEO again. His eyes were not curious or greedy. They were thoughtful. "I hope you rest well," he whispered. Then he left. The door closed quietly. The CEO opened his eyes. For a long moment, he did not move. He stared at the spot where the janitor had stood. Something felt different. The test he thought he was running had not gone the way he expected. There was no theft, no shortcuts, no sign of disrespect, only care and exhaustion. He stood up slowly and walked to the window. The city lights blurred slightly as he thought about the whisper, about the tone of the man's voice. It was not weakness. It was responsibility. The CEO remembered his own nights years ago, long before the building, before the power. Back when he promised himself he would never struggle again. Somewhere along the way, those promises had changed, hardened. A knock came at the door. The CEO turned quickly, but no one entered. He realized it was just the echo of memory, the sound of the janitor's careful knock that never came. He walked back to his desk and sat down. The office felt less empty now, but not in a comforting way. More like it was asking him something. Outside, the janitor pushed his cart down the long hallway. His feet hurt. His hands ached. But his mind was on home, on a small place with a light always left on a child waiting, even if already asleep. He did not know he had been tested. He did not know someone powerful had listened to his every move. All he knew was that tomorrow would come, and he would do the same thing again. Work honestly. Keep his word. Stay quiet. Back in the office, the CEO stared at the door long after the man was gone. For the first time in a long while, he felt unsure not about others, but about himself, and that uncertainty stayed with him as the night grew deeper, waiting for what the next evening might reveal. The next morning, the building felt the same as always. Bright lights, ringing phones, footsteps in the hall. But for the CEO, nothing felt normal. He could not stop thinking about the janitor. The way he moved quietly, the care in his work, the whisper he had barely heard. It was like a small window had opened into someone else's life, and he could not look away. He tried to focus on reports and numbers, on meetings that demanded decisions and attention. But his mind kept drifting back to the janitor. He wondered about the man's life outside these walls, who he was, why he worked so hard, what kept him going through the long nights. Curiosity was stronger than strategy or profit. Later that morning, when the janitor arrived, he did not notice the CEO watching. The janitor pushed his cart down the hallway with familiar precision. His movements were methodical. His steps were careful. Every action was deliberate, almost like a dance he had practiced for years. The CEO observed from his corner office, not wanting to be seen. He noticed the small things, how the janitor straightened a chair even when no one would notice, how he made sure the floors were spotless without rushing, how he paused for a moment to adjust the air vent cover that had shifted slightly. Every action showed thoughtfulness, responsibility, and pride in work that most people took for granted. The CEO leaned back in his chair, thinking about the life it took to develop such patience. He imagined long days, early mornings, nights spent cleaning offices, while others slept comfortably in their homes. He imagined the weight of responsibility the janitor must carry, not just for the job, but for life itself. It was then that he noticed the subtle signs of struggle, the slight hesitation before lifting heavy objects, the occasional pause to rub his back or his shoulders, the weariness in his eyes, though he tried to hide it. These were the marks of a man carrying more than just cleaning supplies. He was carrying life itself on his shoulders. The CEO realized he knew nothing about the janitor's story. He did not know how many years he had been working these nights. He did not know why he kept going despite exhaustion, despite the monotony, despite the lack of recognition. All he could see were the results. A clean office, a man moving with care, a presence that was quietly powerful. Later, during a brief pause in his own work, the CEO found himself looking for the janitor. Not to test him, not to watch, but just to see. And then he noticed something that made him pause. The janitor had a small, worn photograph tucked into his cleaning cart. He could not see it clearly from the office, but he could tell it was a picture of a child. A boy or girl, smiling. For the first time, the CEO understood part of the story. This was not just about cleaning offices. This was about providing, protecting, keeping a promise. The whisper from last night made sense now. Just a few more hours. Then I'll come home. He could hear the tired hope in those words. He could feel the love. He watched as the janitor moved on to the next office, carrying the photograph carefully in his pocket. The small object, so fragile in a world that often overlooked him, was a symbol of everything he worked for. It was a reminder of why he continued, why he endured. The CEO could not help but feel a mixture of admiration and guilt. Admiration for the strength, discipline, and honesty of this man. Guilt because he had always assumed the people around him were like numbers on a page, tools for profit, instruments to achieve his goals. He had never thought about the lives behind the work, the sacrifices behind the effort. During lunch, he left his office to walk through the hallways. He wanted to see the janitor from a different angle, not hidden behind glass or titles. As he walked, he noticed the small touches that made the building function smoothly. The janitor had replaced missing pens in the conference room. He had stacked chairs neatly after a meeting. He had taken a moment to adjust a plant that had leaned to one side. These were tiny, almost invisible acts, yet they spoke volumes. He watched the janitor stop at the stairwell, checking a light that flickered. He climbed the steps slowly, each motion deliberate, careful not to disturb anything. The CEO thought about how many nights this man must have climbed those steps, alone, in silence, carrying the weight of both work and home life. For a moment, he imagined the janitor at home, perhaps cooking a simple dinner, cleaning up, making sure everything was ready for a child waiting for him, perhaps reading a story or whispering words of encouragement, perhaps lying awake late at night, thinking about tomorrow and how to make it better. The CEO realized he had never considered these lives before. He had never seen the quiet heroism in ordinary people. By the end of the day, the CEO found himself reflecting more than acting. Meetings were less important now. Decisions felt less urgent. The whisper he had heard and the care he had seen carried a weight that numbers could not measure. He felt something new, a desire to understand, to see life beyond the office, to appreciate the effort and sacrifice that often went unnoticed. That night, he stayed later than usual, not to test, not to judge, but to witness. He watched the janitor arrive and begin his work, and he saw more than cleaning. He saw routine, dedication, and love expressed in small acts. He saw patience, humility, and integrity, and he began to understand what it meant to live a life quietly heroic, without recognition, without reward, just because it was the right thing to do. The CEO knew the test he had imagined would be meaningless. There was no trick here, no challenge to catch someone failing. The janitor was not performing for approval. He was performing for life itself, for promises made, for a child who depended on him, for a dignity that was invisible to most, but absolute in his own heart. As the janitor finished for the night and moved toward the door, the CEO remained in his office, thinking. The building was silent again. Only the soft echo of footsteps faded into the hall. The photograph in the janitor's pocket seemed to glow in his imagination, a symbol of everything that mattered beyond power, money, and position. And as the CEO sat back in his chair, he realized that his own life, full of achievement and wealth, had been missing something vital, the quiet courage of someone who lived honestly, worked faithfully, and loved deeply, without expectation of reward. The janitor had taught him something he had never learned in school, in boardrooms, or in offices filled with applause. Tonight, he thought, he would not pretend to sleep. Tonight, he would watch, not as a test, not as a judge, but as someone who wanted to understand. And in that choice, he felt the first stirrings of a change that would not come from books, from meetings, or from power, but from seeing the human heart at work, quietly and courageously, in the life of someone he had once overlooked. The night stretched on. The janitor moved through the offices as he always did, carrying more than a mop, a cart, or a cleaning cloth. He carried responsibility, hope, and a promise that no hardship could erase. And the CEO, for the first time in many years, felt something he had not expected. Awe at the small acts that mattered most. Awe at the strength it took to live honorably in silence. Awe at a life quietly heroic, unseen yet unbroken. And he knew that tomorrow, and the day after, and the nights that followed would be different. Because he had seen what most people did not, and it had left a mark deeper than any meeting, any profit, any title ever could. He watched the janitor leave, the photograph safely tucked away, the cart empty, the work complete. And for a long time, the CEO sat in the dark office, thinking not of tests, not of judgments, but of life itself. And in that reflection, a quiet understanding began to grow, a recognition of courage, dignity, and love that existed even in the humblest corners of the world. The office was quiet again that night. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint echo of distant traffic filled the space. The CEO sat in his chair, staring at the polished floors, thinking about the janitor. He had watched him work for days now, and each time he learned something new. The way the man treated his work, the care he put into small details, the respect for rules and boundaries, it was all remarkable. But tonight felt different. Tonight he wanted to truly understand him, not just observe. The janitor arrived quietly, as always. His movements were familiar, steady, and deliberate. The CEO noticed a slight slump in his shoulders tonight, as if the weight of the day had grown heavier than usual. Yet there was also a determination in his steps that could not be ignored. It was a silent promise. No matter how tired, he would finish his work properly. As the janitor moved down the hallway, the CEO could see the small ways he approached his job. He paused at the elevator to straighten the hand sanitizer, made sure every door handle was polished, and adjusted a chair in the waiting area. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was ignored. Every action was intentional. The janitor stopped for a moment in front of a large potted plant near the CEO's office. He looked at it carefully, then tilted it slightly, making sure it was perfectly upright. His hands were rough from labor, yet his touch was gentle. The CEO watched, feeling an unusual mix of respect and curiosity. This was more than cleaning. It was care, thought, and attention. He followed the janitor with his eyes as he continued to work. He noticed how the man moved quietly, avoiding loud steps, careful not to disturb the silence. The CEO wondered about his life outside the building. Who did he go home to? What challenges did he face? He realized he had no idea what drove this man. He did not even know his name. But there was something in his presence that spoke volumes. The janitor stopped suddenly and reached into his pocket. He pulled out the small photograph he always carried. The CEO could see it now, more clearly, a child, smiling, full of life. The janitor's gaze softened as he looked at the picture, and he whispered words that the CEO could barely hear, yet they cut through the quiet office like a knife. Be strong. We will be okay. I promise. The words were not loud, but they carried weight. The CEO felt his chest tighten. This was not just a man at work. This was a father, a protector, someone carrying the burden of a child's hope and trust. He understood, for the first time, that this man's life was built not just on effort, but on love and responsibility. The janitor placed the photograph back carefully and moved to the next room. He worked slowly, deliberately. When he thought he was alone, he whispered again, this time almost to himself. Just a little more. I have to keep my promise. The CEO froze. He had heard hundreds of whispers in offices, complaints about pay, complaints about coworkers, but this was different. This was a promise to someone who depended on him completely. This was love and responsibility spoken in the quietest way possible. He realized that he had been testing the wrong person all along. He had thought the janitor was being tested, but in truth, the CEO himself was the one under observation. How would he respond to honesty, to integrity, to care that went unseen? How would he respond to a life lived faithfully without expectation? The janitor moved on to clean a conference room. He noticed a stack of papers slightly out of order. Instead of shoving them aside or ignoring them, he arranged them neatly, aligning every edge. The CEO could see the concentration on his face, the care in his movements. Every action was deliberate, every gesture thoughtful. The janitor paused for a moment and sighed softly. He rubbed his hands together, then muttered again, words meant for no one. I can do this. We will be all right. Just a little longer. The CEO leaned back in his chair. He could not look away. The whispered words echoed in his mind. They were simple, yet powerful. They carried a life's weight, a father's love, a promise to a child he could not afford to break. And the CEO felt a strange mix of admiration and shame. He had never considered the weight others carried silently. He had never listened this closely. The janitor moved quietly, finishing his work one room at a time. He cleaned, straightened, adjusted, and polished. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic. Every action seemed to carry meaning beyond the task itself. The CEO realized that this man's life was built on small, deliberate acts of integrity, each one a reflection of his character. When the janitor returned to the CEO's office to empty the trash, he paused once more. He looked at the man sitting at the desk, pretending to work, and whispered softly again. May tomorrow be better than today. May we have strength to keep going. The words struck the CEO like a physical blow. They were simple, yet full of power. He felt something shift inside him. The test he thought he was running had no meaning. He realized that character, honesty, and love could not be measured by observation alone. They could only be felt, experienced, and respected. The janitor finished his tasks and moved toward the door. The photograph in his pocket was safe. The cart was pushed gently, every item in place. He did not look back, but the words he whispered lingered in the room. The CEO remained seated long after the janitor left. He could not stop thinking about the quiet strength, the whispered promises, and the invisible courage he had witnessed. For the first time, he felt small, not in the physical sense, but in the awareness of someone else's life, someone else's dedication, someone else's love. He realized that true power was not in wealth or title, but in the quiet acts of integrity that shaped a life. He realized that lessons could come from anywhere, even from someone whose job seemed insignificant by society's standards. He realized that the janitor, in his quiet, unnoticed way, was teaching him about life, love, and responsibility. The night stretched on. The building was silent again. The CEO sat in his chair, thinking deeply. He thought about his own promises, his own responsibilities, and how often they went unfulfilled. He thought about the way he treated people, the assumptions he made, and the lives he overlooked. And he knew, with certainty, that something had changed inside him. The whisper of the janitor's words replayed in his mind. Just a little more. I have to keep my promise. Simple words, yet full of life, full of meaning, full of truth. And in that quiet moment, the CEO understood that he had witnessed something rare and extraordinary, the quiet heroism of a man living faithfully, honestly, and courageously in a world that often ignored him. He stayed in the office long after the janitor left, not because he wanted to observe, but because he wanted to reflect, because he knew that what he had seen tonight was not just about cleaning offices. It was about life, about love, about keeping promises, no matter how difficult, about courage, dignity, and integrity in the smallest of actions. For the first time, he understood that tests were not about catching someone failing. Tests were about seeing truth. And the janitor, in his whispered words and careful actions, had passed with a strength that could not be measured. The CEO finally stood and walked to the window. The city lights glimmered below, but he did not see them. He saw a life lived faithfully, a promise kept quietly, and a strength that shone brighter than any office light, any boardroom, any title. Tonight, he knew. He had learned something that would stay with him forever, and he would never look at work, responsibility, or people the same way again, because he had witnessed the quiet heroism of a man who whispered for hope, worked for love, and lived for integrity. And that whisper, faint but full of meaning, had changed everything. The office was darker than usual that night. Only a few lights along the hallways glowed, and the hum of the air conditioning seemed louder in the silence. The CEO sat at his desk, hands folded, staring at the floor. He had watched the janitor for days now, quietly observing him, trying to understand the man behind the work. But tonight, he felt an unusual tension in the air. He wanted to see him clearly, not from afar, not from behind the safety of walls or glass, but directly. The janitor arrived at his usual time, pushing the cart carefully down the hallway. His movements were slow, deliberate, and tired. The weight of his day was evident in the slight bend of his shoulders and the careful placement of each foot. He looked older than his age, yet there was a quiet strength in him that could not be ignored. The CEO stayed still, pretending to work, pretending to be absorbed in papers on his desk. But this time he was awake. He wanted to hear, to understand, to know. The janitor, unaware, began his routine quietly, methodically. He checked the trash cans, straightened chairs, and adjusted papers. Each action was precise. Each gesture showed care. As the janitor approached the CEO's desk, he noticed something different. The chair was empty, or so he thought. He glanced inside the office and froze for a moment. The CEO leaned forward slightly, smiling faintly, but saying nothing. The janitor's heart skipped a beat. He had expected an empty room or someone asleep. He had not expected the man to be awake, watching. The janitor took a small step back. His hands gripped the cart tightly, knuckles white. He had always been careful, always respectful, but now a fear rose in him he had never felt before. He worried about being judged, about making a mistake. He worried about disappointing someone he did not even know. The CEO finally spoke, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I've been watching you work." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. The janitor froze, unsure whether to respond. He lowered his head slightly, feeling exposed, yet strangely unafraid. There was honesty in him that did not need hiding. I just do my work, the janitor said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I can see that, the CEO replied. I can see more than that. I can see the care. I can see the effort. I can see the responsibility you carry, even when no one notices. The janitor's eyes widened slightly. He had never heard words like that directed at him. Never from someone in power, never from someone who had the ability to judge him harshly. He looked down, unsure how to respond. I just want to do what's right, he whispered. For my child, for home. That's all. The CEO leaned back in his chair, letting the words sink in. He realized that this man's life was more than a job. It was a promise, a responsibility, a daily battle to keep something bigger than himself alive. And he felt a deep respect that he had never felt for anyone in his life. Do you understand how rare that is? The CEO asked softly. To work faithfully without recognition, without reward, simply because it is the right thing to do? The janitor shook his head slightly. I don't think about that. I just do it. I have to. The CEO nodded. He could see the exhaustion in the man's eyes, the tension in his body, the weight he carried silently. And yet there was no complaint, no excuse, only dedication, only commitment, only love. May I ask you something? The CEO said carefully. The janitor hesitated but nodded. Why do you keep going? The question hung in the air. The janitor looked down, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the small photograph he always carried. He held it for a moment, looking at it with gentle reverence. For him, he whispered. For my child. I promised I would never let him go without what he needs. I promised I would be strong. That's why I keep going, no matter how hard it gets. The CEO felt a lump form in his throat. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight he had never experienced. He realized that all the power in the world, all the titles, all the wealth, could never replace this kind of responsibility. He realized that integrity, love, and faithfulness were stronger than any boardroom decision or contract. He reached out slightly, placing a hand on the desk as if to close the gap between them. I've been wrong about a lot of things. About people. About life. About what matters. Watching you. It has made me see that. The janitor looked up surprised. He had never expected such honesty. He had never expected someone so powerful to admit error. Yet he saw it in the man's eyes, truth, reflection, understanding. People like me. We get overlooked, the janitor said softly. We do what we have to do, and nobody sees it. Nobody cares. But it's what keeps life going. The CEO nodded slowly. I see you now. I see everything. And I realize I have been blind to what really matters. A long silence followed. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights and the distant traffic outside. In that quiet, something shifted between them. The power imbalance, the assumptions, the judgments, they all faded. What remained was understanding, respect, humanity. The janitor straightened slightly, feeling a weight lifted that he did not know he had carried. He had spent his life working, providing, and sacrificing without recognition. But now, in this moment, he felt seen. Truly seen. The CEO finally spoke again. I want to help. Not as charity, not as pity, but because I respect what you do, what you are, and what you fight for every day. The janitor's eyes widened. He had never expected such words. He had never imagined that someone in power would see him, understand him, and offer support without judgment. I "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Then don't say anything," the CEO replied. "Just know that your effort, your honesty, your care, it matters more than you realize." The janitor nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. He returned the photograph to his pocket, carefully, like a sacred object. He moved toward the door, cart in hand, and paused. He looked back at the CEO once more. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me." The CEO remained seated, watching him leave. The words echoed in his mind, deeper than any speech or presentation he had ever heard. He understood now that leadership was not about control, titles, or wealth. It was about seeing people, understanding them, valuing the work that often goes unnoticed. When the janitor disappeared down the hallway, the CEO stayed at his desk, thinking. He thought about the life behind that small photograph, the quiet courage it took to keep promises, to endure hardship, to live faithfully without reward. He thought about how many people in the world lived like this, unnoticed, unappreciated, yet vital to the fabric of life itself. And he knew that this moment had changed him, not because of money, influence, or power, but because of the honesty, love, and dedication he had witnessed. He had been tested, not by a board, not by a meeting, not by numbers, but by a man who lived quietly, courageously, and faithfully every single day. The office grew darker, the city outside quieter. But inside, the CEO felt a spark, a shift, a recognition of what truly mattered. He had seen the whisper of life, the strength behind tired eyes, the courage in small actions. And he would never forget it, because sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from books or speeches or authority, but from the quiet strength of someone simply doing what is right, even when no one is watching. And tonight, he had learned that lesson in the most human way possible. The night was quiet, the building almost empty, but the CEO sat in his office, awake, thinking about the janitor. He had watched him for days, listened to him, learned from him. Each evening had revealed something new: patience, honesty, care, love. And now, after the conversation they had shared, he realized he had a choice to make. The choice was not about business, not about profits, not about power. It was about human life, about respect, and about doing what was right. The janitor arrived that night as usual, pushing his cart slowly down the hall. His movements were steady, yet tired. Each step carried the weight of responsibility, the weight of promises, and the weight of sacrifice. He did not notice the CEO, watching from the office doorway this time. The man had left his desk, wanting to see the janitor up close, not from behind glass, not from a distance. He wanted to understand fully. As the janitor entered the office to clean, he paused when he noticed the CEO standing there. There was no fear, no tension, only a quiet awareness that someone was present. The CEO smiled softly, a gentle acknowledgement rather than a test. "I've been thinking," the CEO began, his voice calm, "about everything I've seen, about your work, your life, the way you care. I realize now that I have been blind in many ways." The janitor nodded slightly, unsure whether to speak. He was not used to recognition, especially from someone like him. Most people ignored the work he did. Most people did not see the effort, the dedication, the love. But here, in this quiet moment, someone saw it all. "You have been carrying more than most people know," the CEO continued. "And you do it without complaint, without expectation, simply because it is right. That kind of integrity is rare. That kind of courage is rare. And it deserves more than silence." The janitor looked down at his hands for a moment, then reached into his pocket and touched the photograph he always carried. The child in that photo had been his motivation, his reason to endure, his reason to keep going despite exhaustion, despite life's unfairness. "I do what I have to," he whispered. "It is not much, but it is enough. For him, for home, for the promise I made." The CEO stepped closer. "It is more than enough," he said, "more than anyone realizes. And I want to help not as charity, not as pity, but as respect, as acknowledgement of the life you live, the work you do, and the love you carry." The janitor looked up, eyes wide. He had never imagined words like this would come from someone in power. He had never imagined that someone would see him, understand him, and offer support without judgment. "What? How?" he began, struggling to find words. "I do my work. I provide. That is all I know." "That is more than all anyone else knows," the CEO replied. "I want to ensure that what you do, the life you build, the promises you keep, are never overlooked again. I want to give you the chance to focus not only on survival, but on life itself." For the first time, the janitor felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The exhaustion, the struggle, the constant worry, all of it was still there, but now it shared space with hope. The hope that someone recognized the effort, someone understood the sacrifice, someone truly cared. The CEO reached into his desk and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it gently on the edge of the desk. "This is a start," he said. "A start to ensure that your efforts are respected and rewarded, that your child never has to go without, and that your work is honored." The janitor hesitated. He was not used to receiving. Not from anyone. Not even from life itself. He slowly opened the envelope and found papers inside. A formal offer for a better role, access to support, and recognition that would guarantee stability for his family. He looked at the CEO, tears welling in his eyes. I don't know what to say this. This is more than I could ever expect." "You don't need to say anything," the CEO replied. "Just continue being who you are. That is more than enough. That is everything." The janitor nodded, swallowing hard. He had spent years living quietly, working tirelessly, never seeking attention, never asking for help. Yet here it was, offered not as charity, but as acknowledgement. Not as sympathy, but as respect. Not as a handout, but as recognition of human courage, integrity, and love. As the janitor continued his work that night, he did so with a different spirit. His movements were still careful, still deliberate, but now there was a sense of ease, a sense of relief, a sense of dignity restored. Every sweep of the mop, every adjustment of a chair, every clean surface carried not only effort but hope. The CEO watched quietly, feeling something shift inside him as well. He realized that leadership, success, and power were not measured by profits, titles, or influence. They were measured by the ability to see people, to understand lives, to honor effort, and to recognize courage where it often went unseen. For the rest of the night, they worked side by side in a way, though not together. The janitor performing his duties, carrying responsibility, whispering small words of encouragement to himself, and the CEO witnessing, reflecting, learning. The building, the offices, the quiet halls, they became a place of understanding, a space where human dignity was acknowledged and honored. When the janitor finally packed his cart and prepared to leave, he paused. He looked at the CEO, and this time there was no fear, no hesitation. Only gratitude, respect, and recognition. "Thank you," he whispered softly, "for seeing me, for understanding." "You don't need to thank me," the CEO replied. "You have done everything yourself. I only acknowledge it. I only help it shine." The janitor smiled faintly, a smile that carried years of struggle and the light of hope. He pushed the cart down the hallway, lighter than before. He carried the weight of his life, but now it was shared, not just with himself, but with someone who understood, someone who respected, someone who valued what he did. Outside, the streets were quiet. The night air was cool, filled with the faint sounds of a city that rarely noticed the lives moving through it. The janitor walked home, tired but relieved. He knew tomorrow would be another day of work, responsibility, and sacrifice, but he also knew it would be different. He had been seen. He had been understood. He had been acknowledged. And that acknowledgement carried a power greater than any exhaustion or struggle. Back in the office, the CEO returned to his desk. He sat quietly, reflecting on the night, on the days that had led up to this moment, and on the future. He knew that his life had been changed, not by meetings, not by profits, not by strategy, but by witnessing courage, integrity, and love in its purest form. He realized that the world was full of quiet heroes, people who carried responsibility, kept promises, and lived faithfully without recognition. And he knew that his role, as someone with influence and power, was to see them, acknowledge them, and give them the support they deserved. In that quiet office, the CEO made a decision. From now on, he would lead differently. He would not just see numbers or outcomes. He would see people. He would see lives, struggles, sacrifices, and promises. He would honor them, support them, and ensure that those who worked faithfully, even in silence, were recognized and valued. Days turned into weeks, and the change began. The janitor's life improved, not because he sought it, not because he asked, but because someone saw him and honored his effort. His child never went without. His work became respected. His quiet dignity was acknowledged. And for the first time, he felt truly supported, not just as an employee, but as a human being. The CEO, too, changed. He walked the halls differently, listened differently, and treated people differently. He realized that true leadership was not about authority, but about recognition, understanding, and respect. And he carried that lesson with him, not as a strategy, not as a policy, but as a principle that would guide his life forever. One evening, months later, the CEO found himself in the office just as the janitor was finishing his shift. He looked at the man and smiled. The janitor returned the smile, faint but warm. In that simple exchange, there was understanding,